I remember the exact moment I first noticed it, how the air in my apartment felt thicker, how my skin prickled with a sensation I couldn't name, like something invisible had settled just behind me, watching. The night was ordinary at first, the kind of late evening where the hum of the city outside my window was nothing more than distant sirens and the occasional honk of a car. My laptop screen cast a dull blue glow against the walls as I scrolled mindlessly through forums, my eyes half-lidded from exhaustion, debating whether I should finally go to bed. Then, a flicker of movement outside my window caught my attention. Not movement, exactly, more like a shifting presence, something that felt as though it had always been there, yet had only just arrived. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see a plane, maybe a reflection from a streetlight. But what I saw instead made my stomach twist into a tight, painful knot. Hanging low in the sky, nestled just above the rooftops of the neighboring buildings, was a second moon. It wasn't smaller, or dimmer, or even unfamiliar in any way, it looked exactly like the moon I had grown up with, the same craters, the same pale glow. It was as though someone had copied and pasted the original onto the sky, positioned it just slightly off to the side, as if testing whether anyone would notice. My breath hitched as I reached for my phone, my fingers moving automatically, trembling slightly as I swiped open the camera. I had to capture this, had to prove to myself that I wasn't dreaming or losing my mind. But as I lifted the phone and aimed it at the sky, a sudden, suffocating silence filled the room. The noise of the city outside vanished, the sirens, the distant hum of traffic, even the faint buzz of my refrigerator, it all ceased in an instant, leaving behind an emptiness so complete it made my ears ring. My pulse thundered in my chest as I pressed record, the camera lens locking onto the two identical moons, both hanging still and impossibly bright. But then, just as the red recording dot appeared on my screen, the image on my phone glitched. For the briefest second, the second moon flickered, not like a star winking out, but like a corrupted video file, the pixels breaking apart before reforming in the same perfect sphere. My heartbeat pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat as I watched the screen, my breath coming in quick, uneven gasps. I looked back at the sky, then at my phone, switching between the two, my stomach knotting tighter with each glance. On my phone screen, there was only one moon. The second one was gone. But when I lowered the device, my own two eyes confirmed the terrifying truth, both moons were still there, still watching, still waiting. The air pressed in around me, thick and wrong, the kind of oppressive stillness that precedes something terrible. I could feel it, the slow, creeping realization that I had just witnessed something I wasn't meant to see, and whatever was responsible for that second moon now knew I had seen it too. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the two identical moons burned behind my eyelids, pulsing like an afterimage from a flash of light. My body felt leaden, too heavy for the mattress, my mind racing in circles, trying to rationalize what I had seen. But every logical explanation crumbled under the weight of the truth, there were two moons, and no one else seemed to notice. When the first streaks of dawn painted my ceiling in gray light, I forced myself out of bed, groggy and nauseous, my mouth dry like I had swallowed sand. My phone lay on the nightstand, and for a moment, I hesitated before reaching for it. A deep, gnawing dread settled in my gut, like something inside me already knew what I was about to find. When I finally unlocked the screen and opened my gallery, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. The video I had recorded the night before was gone. It wasn't corrupted, wasn't replaced by a black screen, wasn't even a glitched file. It simply didn't exist. My hands trembled as I scrolled frantically through my gallery, checking the time stamps, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The last saved video was from 2 nights ago, there was no trace of anything I had recorded last night. My heart pounded against my ribs, a sickening, erratic rhythm that made my vision swim. I checked my cloud backup, my recent deletions, every possible place a lost file could be recovered. Nothing. It was as if I had never hit record at all. Swallowing hard, I pushed myself off the bed and stumbled toward the window, almost afraid to look outside, afraid of what I might, or might not, see. And when my gaze finally lifted to the sky, my breath caught in my throat. The second moon was still there. Exactly where it had been last night. But something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just the way it hung motionless in the sky, too perfect, too identical, as though it had been copy-pasted. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite put into words. The air felt thicker when I looked at it, like an unseen pressure was pressing against my skin. My thoughts felt sluggish, like I was wading through a dense fog, my memories shifting in ways I couldn't explain. I forced myself to step away from the window, shaking my head, trying to clear the creeping sense of unease wrapping itself around my chest. I needed to tell someone, needed to make sure I wasn't going insane. I grabbed my phone and opened my messages, hesitating for only a second before typing out a text to my closest friend. "Hey, weird question, have you noticed anything strange about the moon lately?" I hit send, staring at the screen, waiting, my pulse thudding in my ears. A minute passed. Then two. Then my phone vibrated with a response. A single, three-word reply that sent ice sliding down my spine. Which one? The words on my phone screen stared back at me, sending an unnatural chill through my veins. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my mind scrambling to form a response, but nothing felt right. How was I supposed to reply to that? My breath came in short, uneven gasps as I reread the message, hoping I had somehow misinterpreted it, that maybe my friend was just messing with me, some bizarre attempt at humor. But deep down, I knew. They had seen it too. My hands trembled as I finally typed, "What do you mean?" and hit send, my stomach twisting into knots as I waited for the reply. The minutes stretched on, too long, too silent. Outside, the daylight had an unnatural quality, a muted sharpness that made the world feel slightly off, as if reality itself had been altered just enough to be noticeable. The shadows cast by the trees on the sidewalk didn't stretch the way they should have, bending at wrong angles, and the air felt too still, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Then, my phone vibrated in my hand, the sound making me flinch so violently I nearly dropped it. My friend's response was short, but it made my stomach lurch with a nauseating, primal fear. "Forget it. Just, don't look at it." The words sent a sickening pulse of dread through my entire body, a creeping, unshakable certainty that whatever this was, it was worse than I had imagined. My mind screamed at me to listen, to let it go, to pretend I had never seen that second moon at all. But my body was already moving, my feet dragging me back toward the window before I could stop myself. My pulse hammered as I pulled back the curtain, my gaze lifting involuntarily to the sky. And that's when I realized something was terribly wrong. The second moon was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer a perfect replica of the first. Its shape had shifted, becoming slightly warped, as if something inside it was pushing against its surface, struggling to break free. The glow it cast wasn't the usual pale luminescence of the real moon, it had taken on an eerie, reddish hue, pulsing faintly, almost like it was breathing. My stomach twisted as I felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched, an invisible force pressing down on me, as if an unseen gaze had locked onto my every movement. I tried to step back from the window, tried to look away, but my body refused to listen. It was as if something had latched onto me, an unseen thread pulling me toward it, compelling me to keep watching. And then, just as the terror in my chest reached its breaking point, I saw it, a faint, dark slit appearing across the surface of the second moon, slowly pulling apart, revealing something behind it. Something vast. Something alive. The slit on the surface of the second moon widened, stretching like an unhealed wound in the sky, revealing a void so black it swallowed the stars behind it. I wanted to believe my eyes were playing tricks on me, that exhaustion was twisting my perception, warping my thoughts. But then, something moved inside the darkness, something vast, shifting, pressing against the edges of the tear like a creature testing the boundaries of its cage. A deep, sickening instinct clawed at the back of my mind, a primal certainty that whatever was inside that moon was trying to get out. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat, my body screaming at me to look away, to run, to do anything but keep watching. And yet, I couldn't. My limbs refused to obey, my breath shallow and ragged as my fingers gripped the windowsill so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then, the world lurched. It wasn't an earthquake, wasn't a gust of wind, it was something worse. The entire street outside shifted, as if reality itself had skipped a frame, like a glitch in a corrupted video. The streetlights flickered in unison, their glow pulsing in time with the moon's eerie red hue. The buildings across from me seemed to stretch for a fraction of a second, bending at impossible angles before snapping back into place. I blinked hard, my pulse hammering, but the feeling of wrongness only deepened. The world was breaking. Time was slipping. And the second moon was the cause. I stumbled back from the window, gasping for air, my vision blurring as the room around me shuddered. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, opening the camera, desperate to capture proof before it was too late. But when I looked at the screen, I nearly dropped the device in horror. The footage on my phone didn't match what I was seeing with my own eyes. Through the screen, the street outside was completely normal, a quiet, undisturbed neighborhood under a single moon. The buildings weren't warping, the lights weren't flickering, and the second moon. It wasn't there at all. My breath hitched as I turned the phone away from the window, pointing it at my own reflection in the dark glass. And that's when I saw it, my own face, staring back at me, frozen in absolute terror. But the real horror? My reflection wasn't moving. My mouth hung open in a silent scream, my hands gripping the frame of the window, my entire body motionless, locked in a pose I wasn't making. And just as I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck, the reflection's lips began to move. I staggered backward, my heart hammering so violently against my ribs that I thought it might shatter. My breath came in ragged gasps as my trembling hands struggled to keep hold of my phone. The reflection in the dark glass remained frozen, its lips still forming silent words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. It wasn't me. It wasn't a delayed movement or a trick of the light, it was something else. A version of me that wasn't bound by my actions, a shadow that had stepped out of sync with time itself. My gut twisted with a deep, unnatural terror, the kind that burrows under the skin and festers, something ancient and instinctual screaming at me to run, to get out, to stop looking. But before I could move, the reflection blinked. And in that fraction of a second, something shifted around me. The room flickered, the walls vibrating like a mirage under a burning sun, bending, warping, then snapping back into place. But they weren't the same anymore. My furniture was wrong. My bookshelf, which had always stood against the left wall, was suddenly to the right. My bed was unmade, the covers tossed as if someone had just crawled out of it, but I knew for a fact I hadn't touched them. Even the air smelled different, stale and metallic, like blood left to dry in the sun. I turned, swallowing hard, my pulse pounding as I forced myself to glance at the window again. My reflection was still there, but now, so was something else. Behind my reflection, standing in the center of my room, was a figure. Tall. Still. Featureless. A shadow with no face, its edges blurred like a smudge on reality itself. My blood ran cold as I realized it wasn't just standing there, it was watching me. I couldn't see its eyes, couldn't even make out a shape where its face should be, but I felt it. A gaze so heavy, so all-consuming, that it pinned me in place like an insect under glass. My breath caught in my throat, my limbs screaming for movement, for escape, but before I could even blink, my phone screen glitched violently, a distorted wave of static and pixels breaking across it. And then, the shadow was gone. My reflection remained, breathing heavily, mirroring my terror, but the figure had vanished as if it had never been there at all. But I knew better. Something was in the room with me. Something had been watching. And now, it knew that I had seen it. I backed away from the window, my breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts, the silence of the room pressing down on me like a heavy, suffocating weight. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to move, to run, to get out, but I was frozen, trapped between the gnawing fear of what I had just seen and the chilling certainty that I was no longer alone. My reflection stared back at me, a perfect replica of my own horror-stricken face, but the moment I blinked, it changed. The other me didn't blink. It just stood there, watching, its lips barely parting in a whisper I couldn't hear but somehow felt, like a vibration deep in my bones. My stomach churned, the bile rising in my throat as my shaking fingers clenched into fists, willing my body to move. The figure was gone. But that didn't mean it had left. I spun around, scanning the dimly lit room, my vision blurred with fear, but nothing seemed out of place, except for the fact that everything was slightly wrong. My bed looked like it had been slept in, but I hadn't touched it. The books on my desk were rearranged, their spines facing outward when I knew I had left them scattered. The air smelled different, stale and electric, like the atmosphere before a storm. And then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't coming from my window. It wasn't coming from my door. It was coming from inside the apartment. My blood turned to ice as I turned toward my closet, my pulse roaring in my ears. The tapping was slow, deliberate, coming from behind the door, like something inside was waiting for me to notice. I took a step forward, my legs unsteady, my fingers numb as I reached for the handle. My breath hitched as the tapping suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a void, a stillness so unnatural that it made my skin crawl. And then, before I could react, the door burst open. A black mass, shifting, crawling with something I couldn't comprehend, surged toward me, tendrils of shadow slithering across the floor, reaching for my legs. I stumbled back, my vision swimming, the thing pouring out of the closet like living darkness. And then, it spoke. Not with a voice, not with words, but with a sound so impossibly distorted, so warped and broken, that it felt like my skull was splitting apart. My knees buckled as I slammed my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The words, asterisk asterisk if they could even be called that, asterisk asterisk slithered into my mind like parasites, embedding themselves into my thoughts, twisting, unraveling, rewriting. And that's when I realized the most horrifying truth of all. I had heard that voice before. It was mine. The voice ripped through my skull like nails scraping against glass, a fractured, guttural distortion that wasn't sound but something deeper, a vibration inside my bones, a pressure pushing against my mind, forcing its way in. My own voice, stretched and broken, whispering things I couldn't understand but somehow already knew. My body convulsed as I staggered backward, slamming into the wall, my vision flickering in and out like a dying light bulb. The black mass spilling from my closet twisted unnaturally, tendrils writhing, shifting between shapes that my brain refused to comprehend. 1 second, it was a shadow, the next, it had limbs, fingers too long, mouths opening where they shouldn't be. But its voice never changed. It was me. I pressed my hands harder against my ears, trying to block out the noise, but it wasn't coming from the room anymore, it was inside me. Memories that weren't mine flashed behind my eyes, blurred images of places I'd never been, people I'd never met, voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize yet somehow understood. I saw myself standing under the second moon, staring up as it slowly peeled apart, revealing something behind its shell, something with too many eyes, too many mouths, something looking directly at me. My stomach twisted as I snapped back to reality, my breath ragged and uneven, my fingers clawed into my own arms like I was trying to anchor myself to the present. The entity from the closet had stopped moving. It was waiting. Watching. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised one of its hands, and pointed at the window. A deep, suffocating dread settled in my chest as I forced myself to turn. The second moon was no longer just a moon. It had opened, splitting down the middle like a cracked egg, spilling something into the night sky, something massive, something alive. Its surface pulsed with an eerie, organic light, shifting, twisting, as if trying to reform itself into something recognizable. The stars behind it blinked out one by one, swallowed by its growing presence. The air in my apartment thickened, pressing down on me like I was standing at the bottom of the ocean, and for the first time, I understood. The second moon wasn't new. It had always been there. Watching. Waiting. And now, it had finally woken up. My mind felt like it was unraveling, my thoughts breaking apart, slipping through the cracks of my consciousness like sand through my fingers. The second moon was no longer just a silent watcher in the sky, it was something else entirely, something that had been waiting, something that had finally begun to remember me, even if I had not remembered it. My breath hitched in my throat as I watched the thing in the sky shift, pulsate, expand, collapse in on itself, like an organism trying to take shape, trying to become something I could understand. The stars around it vanished, devoured by the sheer vastness of its form, its presence bending the sky like a weight pressing down on reality itself. And yet, the world remained normal. No one screamed in terror. No sirens blared. No alarms rang out. It was as if I were the only one who could see it. But that wasn't true, was it? Because someone else had seen it before. My friend. The one who had texted me. The one who had sent that message, forget it. Just, don't look at it. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, my fingers numb, the screen too bright, the letters blurring in my vision as I pulled up our conversation. I needed to call them. I needed to hear their voice, to know that I wasn't losing my mind, that someone else had felt this, seen this, known that reality itself was starting to come undone. The phone rang once. Then twice. Then silence. And then, someone picked up. A breath. Too long. Too deep. My skin prickled, my stomach twisting into knots as a low, distorted voice crackled through the speaker, a voice that sounded almost human but just wrong enough to freeze my blood. You were never supposed to remember, it whispered, the word stretching, warping, twisting into something else, something I couldn't comprehend. My hands went numb, my grip slackening as a violent pulse rippled through my skull, a wave of static crashing into my thoughts. And suddenly, I remembered. I remembered standing beneath a sky that had no sun, only a gaping hole where the second moon had always been. I remembered the way the world had folded around me, reshaped me, placed me here. And I remembered, with a sinking, nauseating dread, that this place, this world, was never mine to begin with. The weight of the realization crashed down on me, cold and absolute. I wasn't supposed to be here. The world around me, the life I had lived, the people I had called friends, none of it was real, at least not for me. It was a construct, a fabrication, a place I had been placed inside, though I could no longer remember why. My chest ached, a deep, pulsing pressure that made it hard to breathe, as if something inside me was trying to wake up, trying to break free from a body that was never meant to hold it. My phone slipped from my grasp, the distorted voice on the other end still murmuring in a language I had once known but had long forgotten, a sound both alien and familiar at the same time. The second moon in the sky shuddered, pulsed, opened wider, its form no longer resembling anything celestial but something alive, something vast, something waiting for me to understand. The world around me began to flicker. The walls of my apartment trembled, the colors bleeding out like wet paint, warping and twisting, the objects in my room rearranging themselves into patterns that didn't make sense. My bed melted into the floor, my books disintegrated into dust, my reflection in the darkened window no longer matched my movements. The version of me on the other side stared, smiled, then slowly lifted a hand, pointing at the ceiling. My pulse roared in my ears as I hesitated, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my hands gripping at my temples as a fresh wave of pain ripped through my skull. But then I heard it, the distant hum, the same deep, low vibration that had haunted my dreams for as long as I could remember. The same sound I had heard when I first noticed the second moon. A call. A summons. A return. I tried to fight it, tried to plant my feet, but my body no longer belonged to me. I was being pulled. Not physically, but something deeper, something reaching inside my very existence, unraveling me, peeling me away from this world like a page torn from a book. The ceiling above me split open, a void stretching beyond it, revealing a sky that was no longer a sky. I saw it then. The place I had come from. The place I had forgotten. A world without light, without stars, without time. The real world. And as I was lifted toward it, my form dissolving, my vision fading, I understood the final, horrifying truth. The second moon had never been a moon. It was a door. And I had finally been called home. The force pulling me upward was relentless, a slow, inevitable unraveling of my existence. My body, or what was left of it, felt weightless, like mist dissolving into the air, my edges fraying as if I were a dream someone was about to wake up from. The ceiling above me was gone, replaced by a void so vast and consuming that it swallowed everything beyond it. The second moon loomed overhead, its form pulsating, the wound at its center yawning wider, revealing something that should have never been seen by human eyes, a space beyond space, a hunger beyond time. I could feel it, watching, waiting, remembering me. And for the first time, I understood that I had never been truly alive in this world. I tried to fight it, clawing at the edges of my reality, desperate to hold on, but my thoughts were slipping, my memories unraveling like old film burning away at the edges. The city below me was changing, the streets stretching into unfamiliar angles, the buildings warping, distorting, their surfaces shifting like something beneath them was trying to push through. The lights flickered in strange, alien patterns, the air itself humming with a frequency that wasn't meant for human ears. Everything was collapsing, breaking apart, resetting. And as I floated higher, my mind fracturing, my reflection still watching from the darkened glass below, I realized that I was witnessing the moment before I had arrived. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. The cycle. I had been here before. I had felt this before. The world had reset, had bent itself around me, had made me fit into its shape, but I had never belonged. The second moon was never a mistake, never an anomaly. It had been waiting for me to remember. It had been calling me back. And as the last of my existence faded, as my name, my face, my life unraveled into the endless blackness beyond, I saw it, the new version of me. The replacement. A figure standing in my apartment, staring out the window, blinking in confusion, looking up at the sky for the first time. And then, like the whisper of a forgotten dream, a voice echoed in my fading consciousness. You see it now, don't you?